this is another significant one that I wanted to bring attention to. A key indicator that has predicted recessions consistently since the 1970s is now once again signaling we might be headed towards a recession. However, there are some caveats, so I don't want people to panic yet. Go ahead and put this up on the screen. 5-year and 30-year Treasury yields invert for the first time since 2006, fueling recession fears. I don't know if you guys have heard this term before, but oftentimes people talk about inverted bond yields. Basically, to make this as simple as possible, typically the further you go out on the time horizon, the higher return you're going to get. This is basic time value of money. If you're willing to hold an instrument for a long time, you're rewarded with a higher interest rate. That's sort of the typical, that's the typical bond yield. And we're talking about US Treasury bonds here specifically. So when things are out of whack and investors are very worried about the longer term prospects for an economy, then sometimes you get funky situations in the bond yield curve where it doesn't just consistently go up over time. They call that an inverted bond yield. Now, usually, when you're thinking about recessions, the ones that investors usually look at are the 2- and the 10-year bond yields. Those have not inverted yet, although there has been significant flattening across the entire curve. Right now, it is the 5-year and 30-year bond yields that have inverted. So if you understand nothing else, just know that this metric signals that the economy is out of whack and people are concerned about the future. That's basically what this means. The history is also quite clear. So the 2- and 10-year Treasury yield curves, that's the one that I just said people typically look at that hasn't inverted yet, but is a lot of flattening. Those inverted before the last 7 recessions since 1970. However, the data also suggests a recession is unlikely to be imminent when you do have a bond yield curve inversion. It took 17 months after the bond market inversion for a downturn to start on average. On the flip side, there has been at least one, some would say 2, false alarms where the bond yield curve inverted and you did not end up in a recession. The one that they're very consistent and clear about is 1998. The other caveat that I'll put on this, but that people who are way smarter and understand this way more than I do were saying, is that it's not clear how much information these bond yields contain anymore because the Fed has gone into the market and is so influential in the market at this point. It's not really a free market anymore. It's effectively sort of rigged. So how much information does this really contain about how investors feel about the future of the economy and, the shape of where we're headed in terms of recession? Hard to say at this point. But again, this is a key metric. It has consistently had predictive power in terms of whether you're going to head into a recession over the next year and a half or so. And right now, it has inverted for the first time since 2006.
Right. And I believe the Federal Reserve Chairman, he was pressed on this in Congress. Let's take a listen.
Is the leadership at the Fed under you and the Fed prepared to do what it takes to get inflation under control and protect price stability?
Well, let me say I knew Paul Volcker. I'm pretty sure I saw him testify in this room many years ago. I think he was one of the great public servants of the era, the greatest economic public servant of the era. And I hope history will record that the answer to your question is yes.
So you're prepared to do what it takes without any reservation to protect price stability?
Yes.
That would be a departure of what you've done. Thank you very much.
So this was Fed Chair Jerome Powell getting pressed on how serious he's going to be at getting inflation under control. And why this is relevant is because obviously the Fed, they just announced their first rate increase, and there's worry that they could move too quickly, lift the rates too fast in an effort to get inflation under control and spark a recession. What he's saying there, he's like, oh my God, I love Paul Volcker. He's amazing. He's a hero. He's a role model. Volcker is the sort of storied Fed Reserve chair who aggressively raised rates during the 70s to curb inflation at that point. And so Powell is saying, this is my model. I'm going to do what it takes to get price, to focus on prices and get inflation under control. And the subtext is, even if it causes a really brutal recession. Because while, at this point everyone says, oh, Volcker did the right thing, it's easy to forget how painful it was at the time.
Horrible.
Yeah, because when you lift interest rates that dramatic, what you're doing is you're intentionally slowing down the economy. So he says, yes, I'm fully committed effectively to getting inflation under control, even if it causes a recession, is kind of the subtext of what he is saying there. Now, the actions have not necessarily been totally consistent with that.
That's right.
He was under some pressure. They were under some pressure to lift rates more, to do so more quickly, to act before they even did. And so there's been an attempt to be sort of like moderated in their actions here. So we haven't seen that spark a recession right now, but you have more and more analysts who fear that we could be headed in that direction.
Yeah, my authority on this is Joe Weisenthal over at Bloomberg. I really look to him on a lot of this. And it seems to be that there's been a split the difference approach at the Fed. The Fed has a dual mandate, full employment and inflation. Now, inflation is what obviously, you know, people in the upper tier care the most about. I'm not erasing exactly how it impacts the working class, but I'm saying that it's generally more of an elite concern amongst like conservatives and Republicans, just because of the way it can affect markets up at the top and interest rates as well, which affects capital, which is what these people care the most about. And in terms of what's happening there is that there's an immense amount of pressure in order to do something about inflation. And that becomes then a question of what is the cause of inflation? Is it monetary policy, or is it a supply chain problem and a problem in the downstream economy? Now, your view of those two things, I personally think it's much more the supply chain, will then lead you to whether you have the monetary instrument that you can reach for.
Right.
The only thing that they can reach for there in order to slow the economy down is increasing the interest rate. So their acceptance and saying they're going to increase the interest rate, at least in part right now and over the course of the next couple of years or so, is very much a bow in that direction, but they're not fully bowing to what I guess the most monetary hawks would like them to do.
People like Richard Shelby there.
People like Richard Shelby is the perfect example. He's the chair of the Senate Banking Committee, so that, or I think the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee next to be the chair, so obviously he matters a lot. He was instrumental in COVID relief in a not necessarily great ways. The reason why it matters for you is because if the interest rate goes up and there is a recession cause, which then causes the amount of cheap capital in order to stop flowing around the system, the rich people will suffer in terms of the stock portfolios, but you're the one who's going to lose your job. Right. And you're the one who's going to see downward pressure, especially under wages, but even worse, you're going to see it in terms of the supply problems that already exist within the economy whenever it comes to price. So I would just say that this is a real catastrophe. Anytime I see and I don't mean the Fed changing rates necessarily. I'm just saying the current situation, the arrow is pointing in the wrong direction. I'm doing my monologue today on China and its COVID-0 policy causing even more inflation. The amount of uncertainty right now in the global economy just makes me incredibly, incredibly nervous. It's very like 2007 vibes about what could be happening here.
I think that's all well said. And what you're pointing to is that, you know, in an ideal functioning political system, you would have a range of tools available to deal with the type of inflation we're experiencing right now, which does have a lot to do with supply chain issues, with the fact that we had, you know, relief checks hit people's pockets and they weren't able to fully partake in like the service economy. So there's more purchasing of goods. There are some signs that some of those factors are beginning to ease, even as you have other catastrophic situations unfolding that are only exacerbating things. So in an ideal and perfect system, you would have a political system that could actually like pass legislation and spend money to deal with the supply chain issue. And I don't mean by just like, you know, giving people more money. I mean by investing in the infrastructure, expanding port capabilities to try to resolve these supply chain issues. That would be the ideal system. Well, since the political system is so broken, the only tool that's effectively left is this sort of like blunt force instrument of the Fed, which, I mean, we basically know in no uncertain terms, if they move too fast, it will cause a recession. So that's the terrible landscape that we are faced with right now. And I feel like every week there's another sign that potentially we are headed in that direction, with the bond yield curve inversion here just being the latest one.
Yeah, so everybody keep an eye on it. We're going to keep you guys updated. Watch it like a hawk because it affects you so much.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.